He kept saying he was fine, just tired, just busy. But deep down, he knew. He'd spent 50 years being useful instead of being alive. And once that truth surfaced, nothing felt safe anymore. I used to believe I was just unlucky, that life gave others a head start, a better map, a clearer sky. I worked, I sacrificed, I stayed quiet. And for what? To end up staring at bills with a sinking feeling that became so familiar, I stopped calling it fear. I just called it Monday. No one tells you how expensive dignity becomes when you age, how it costs more to keep your mouth shut than to speak up, how you pay for your silence with your health, your sleep, your dreams. There was a time I thought I was just tired, but the truth is, I was tired of being afraid to want more. They don't teach you this in school. They teach you how to obey, how to adjust, how to be realistic. Realistic is just a polite word for small. Shrink your voice, lower your gaze, accept crumbs, and say thank you. I followed all the rules, and I ended up poor, not just in my wallet, in my thinking, in my choices. At 50, it hit me. Poverty is not what's in your bank account. It's what you allow to stay in your life out of fear. The job you hate, the people who drain you, the limits you never question. That's poverty. And the worst part? It looks so normal you stop noticing it. You convince yourself that survival is enough. But there's a price to pretending you're fine. It costs you your edge, your clarity, your ability to say, "This isn't working for me anymore." So you smile, you nod, and you slowly disappear from your own life. That's how 93% stay poor, by staying quiet, polite, available, and afraid. The tragedy isn't that we don't have enough. It's that we stop asking for more because we think we don't deserve it. Or worse, we think we've missed our chance. You haven't. The world didn't steal your voice. You gave it away, one compromise at a time. And if that stirred something in you, don't look away. Part 2 breaks the lie we've all been sold, why money never fixes the real problem, and what actually does. I've seen people come into money after 50, some from inheritance, some from luck, some from sheer desperation that finally paid off. And you know what changed in their lives? Almost nothing, except now their loneliness lived in a bigger house. Their silence echoed louder. Their fears wore better shoes. Getting rich doesn't save you if you're still scared to say no. That's the part no one wants to hear, that poverty isn't fixed with a raise, a lottery ticket, or a late business idea. Because the problem isn't the income, it's the wiring, the way you've been trained to betray yourself to avoid discomfort. That doesn't vanish with money. It grows, quietly, then viciously. Most people carry around an invisible debt, not financial, but emotional. They owe so much to the image they built, the good worker, the patient partner, the one who never complains. They can't afford to be honest, not with others, not with themselves. So they keep investing in the version of themselves that's always fine, always agreeable, always cheap to maintain. I've watched grown adults with six-figure incomes still ask permission to rest, still explain why they want time for themselves, still apologize for existing in a way that takes up space. That's not financial poverty. That's spiritual bankruptcy. You want to know why most people never make it out? Because they're waiting for a version of success that requires no confrontation, no guilt, no broken patterns. But there's no such version. You either disappoint others or you disappear. There is no third option. What held me down wasn't the system. It wasn't even my job. It was my silence, my need to be liked, to be safe, to never risk being called difficult. I sold my power for peace and got neither. The reason most people stay poor is simple. They spend their whole lives investing in the version of themselves that doesn't scare anyone. And this is where most people stop reading, because Part 3 shows what happens when you finally choose to be someone who says no, and how your entire life turns against you before it gets better. That's where 93% give up. Will you? If this story made something inside you go quiet or loud, you're not alone. Most people never talk about why 93% stay poor after 50. But here, we do. Subscribe if you're ready to stop pretending everything is fine. And leave a comment, not to be heard, but to finally hear yourself. They don't warn you about this part, that the minute you stop saying yes to everything, the world doesn't clap. It punishes you. Softly, but fast. People get quiet. Messages stop coming. Invitations disappear. Suddenly, you're changing. Or worse, not as kind as you used to be. Kind? No. Just tired of being cheap for everyone but myself. There's a strange silence that follows your first boundary. You feel like you did something wrong, even when you didn't, because the world is built on people who never say no. The moment you do, it sees you as dangerous. That's the price of stepping out of poverty, being willing to feel unloved for a while. Not many survive that. When I started saying no, to free advice, to emotional labor, to late-night phone calls from people who never asked how I was doing, something broke. Not around me, inside. This small part of me that still hoped someone would finally see my worth without me earning it. That part died, and with it, my hunger for approval. You won't believe who disappears when you stop being useful. It's not your enemies. It's not the ones you expected. It's the ones who always smiled, always said, "You're amazing," and always needed something. You don't lose people when you set boundaries. You see who they really were all along. That's the part that shatters you. Clarity is violent. The first year I chose to change, I was lonelier than ever. Not because no one was around, but because I finally stopped filling the space with noise that didn't serve me. When the noise left, I was left with myself, and I didn't know who I was. I only knew who I had performed. That's when I realized something brutal. I had built an entire life on being less than I am, so I wouldn't be abandoned. When you finally choose yourself, the world won't applaud. It will test if you really mean it. The next part reveals the exact moment it all turns, not with money, not with power, but with one decision that changes everything forever. Only a few people ever get there. You'll understand why in Part 4 it didn't happen all at once. No voice from the sky, no cinematic breakthrough, just a quiet, angry morning. I looked around and saw nothing left to blame. No boss, no system, no past. Just me, and the truth I'd been avoiding. I was the one keeping myself small now. That's the most painful realization of all, when the enemy turns out to be your habits. For decades I was waiting for a moment, a sign, a permission slip. I told myself I'd start charging what I was worth when I felt ready. I'd leave when it got bad enough. I'd speak when it was safer. But that day never comes. No one ever hands you the life you want. You either take it, or you keep explaining why you didn't. I stopped explaining, started saying prices with a straight face, walked out of conversations that reeked of old patterns, replied to manipulation with silence. I lost people, I lost comfort. But I gained something else, space. Space to think, space to feel, space to become someone I wasn't ashamed of. They say you become free when you stop caring what people think. That's not true. You become free when you care more about your peace than their opinion. It's not comfortable. It's not romantic. Some mornings I woke up in panic. Some nights I doubted every step. But I never went back, because once you feel the weight of dignity, you can't go back to crumbs, not even familiar ones. The first time I said, "I'm not available for this anymore," I was shaking. But after that, it got easier. And then it got quiet. Not the silence of loss, the silence of alignment. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude. One is desperation, the other is power. And most people never find out which is which because they never stop being convenient. You don't need to become someone else to be free. You need to stop betraying who you already are. Part 5 will show you what comes next. Not the fantasy, not the reward, but the real cost of freedom. It's never what people expect, and it's never free. There's no shortcut, no clean break. When you choose dignity, everything built on your silence begins to crack. The job that survived on your compliance, the relationships that thrived on your self-abandonment, the routines that numbed you just enough to keep going, they all fall. Not because you're broken, but because they were never real to begin with. They were held together by your fear of being alone, rejected, misunderstood. And when that fear leaves, so does everything that depended on it. I lost years, not in the past, in the present, because breaking free isn't a moment, it's a season, one where nothing makes sense, no one claps, and every day feels like you're walking through the remains of the life you thought you wanted. There's no manual for that. There's just the silence, and your choice to stay in it. That's what most people can't endure, not the pain, the unknown, the emptiness between identities, the terrifying space where you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. No one talks about that part. They sell you reinvention like it's an upgrade. But in truth, it's a burial of old beliefs, of roles you played so well, you forgot they weren't you, of versions of yourself that only existed to keep the peace. And here's the hardest part. No one saves you from this. Not love, not money, not therapy, only you. On a Tuesday, in a quiet room, choosing not to go back, even though everything in you wants to. Freedom doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief. And that's how you know it's real. Part 6 is not about winning. It's about what's left when you finally stop running, and what you choose to build from there. There's nothing dramatic about the after, no parade, no instant calm, just a quieter rhythm, fewer apologies, and the strange comfort of not needing to explain yourself anymore. It's not that the world gets easier. You just stop negotiating with it. You see the games. You hear the manipulations. You recognize the old patterns dressed in new clothes, but you don't bite. Not because you're stronger, because you're done. That's what real change feels like. Not louder, just cleaner. You say less. You offer less. You tolerate less. And somehow you feel more. The truth is, I didn't become rich, not in the way people measure it. But I stopped being poor the moment I stopped needing to be chosen. That's where everything shifted. Not when I got a better job. Not when I earned more. When I stopped performing for crumbs, emotional, professional, relational, and started living by one rule. If it costs me my peace, it's too expensive. No, I don't have it all together. But I have something better than confidence. I have clarity on who I am, on what I'm no longer available for, on where I end, and where the world begins. That's what they never tell you. That success isn't about arriving somewhere impressive. It's about finally walking through life without shrinking. You don't escape poverty by chasing wealth. You escape by refusing to abandon yourself ever again. So now, when I look back at that version of me, the one who bent, who smiled through the ache, who called survival loyalty, I don't hate him. I thank him. He got me here. But I'm not going back for him. He stayed so I could leave. That's the deal. If you've read this far, you're not like most people. Most never make it to this point, not because they're weak, but because the truth hurts more than failure. Now you know. Now you're not alone. Now you get to decide, will you live quiet and afraid, or finally walk with both feet in your own life?